welcome everybody to this video as we're going to be looking at a historical perspective of the current situation that we're in. You know, when we're in a crisis like this, we seem to think that this might be the only time our country's ever experienced anything to this extent. And while that's probably true in different ways, we can look backwards and see that our country has faced enormous challenges, and we've gotten through them. And so I want to use this video to give us a little inspiration, a little hope, and to see it when we go back and we see it through a historical lens. Things become a little more clear to us when we do that, and that's kind of what I want to do today. And the presidents in the past that have faced that have faced challenges. Think about Abraham Lincoln, for example. He faced a challenge of the country splitting between north and south, and he felt like it was his job to keep the Union intact. That was the purpose from the beginning. Of course, slavery came in there a little bit later, but his main purpose was to keep the Union together by force, and that's a whole nother topic we could get into. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's another example. I mean, he had to face, think about it, an economic collapse, the Great Depression. He had to face the Japanese bombing us at Pearl Harbor and then entering World War II against the Japanese and the Germans. That man faced a lot. Think about George W. Bush on September the 11th, 2001, and then entering into another war with the Islamic terrorists. So, you got presidents who have faced these things and have gotten our country through it. And now we got President Trump, who will also lead, and he is leading, and he's going to be helping getting this country and getting through this particular one. But of all the presidents, and there was other ones that faced different challenges besides those I just mentioned, but of all the presidents, I believe one stands out the most, and that's George Washington. You may be saying, why George Washington? Think about it. Before there ever was a nation, before he was ever president, he was commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. And this man had to defeat, with his soldiers and officers, the greatest army and navy in the world of the British Empire. I mean, he had a colossal task at hand. Then you factor in the fact that the soldiers that are under him have never fought. Well, I shouldn't say never. Some of them had in the Frisian Indian War, but most of them, they don't understand the battle tactics of that time. And Washington has got to teach these guys how to fight. Here's a good analogy. Think about a high school football team saying, we're going to take on the Super Bowl champs and we want to play them in the game, we're going to beat them. That's a good analogy of what Washington was kind of facing. He had a group of men, farmers, merchants, artisans, you name it, just regular citizens trying to take on this giant. Talk about a giant, a David and Goliath story, but this is one of them. And Washington faced innumerable challenges throughout the American Revolution. That's why I choose him, because they had to win their independence from Great Britain before they would ever move on to become a nation. And then he's going to help establish us as a nation. And George Washington, he faced a lot. Now, when you think about George Washington, what comes to mind? The dollar bill. There's many portraits of him. One that comes to mind is him crossing the Delaware on that Christmas night when he's going to surprise attack the Hessian soldiers, and it worked. That was one of his early victories. We see him in a lot of statues around Washington, D.C. and all over Virginia. Of course, you got the Washington Monument. That's not a particular statue of him, but you see him in statues. There's one statue that kind of represents him as a Greek god. Another one on his horse. There's another one that shows him standing in his continental uniform, his soldier uniform. Shows him with a cane. And then there's also in the background a plowshare. This shows all three sides of him, as a soldier, as a citizen, and as a farmer. I like that particular statue because it kind of brings him down to more of a human level. And that's kind of what I want to do today, is to show you that Washington was human just like you and me. And sometimes we need to take these men away from these iconic pictures and take him off the pedestal of these statues and see him just as a regular man. And what I want to focus on is an incident that happened during the early part of the war. Things were not going good. Washington is trying to keep New York City with this ragtag group of soldiers who, quite frankly, don't know a lot about fighting. And, you know, he's trying to hold on to this place, and something happened here. Washington, think about this. George Washington is going to go through a mental breakdown. You heard it. Our first president had a mental breakdown. We don't like talking about that with our iconic heroes, or taking them down from these pictures and statues and seeing them as human, but he was. And I'm going to share with you briefly the story that happened at Kipps Bay, right near New York City. Now, to do that, I'm going to have to put a map up. Now, I love maps, especially war maps, so here it goes. Here comes the map, give us the lay of the land. Boom. Neat, huh? All right, I love this. Now, let's go through. His men, he has about 19,000 men at this time, and he's trying to hold on to New York City. The British commander, Howe, is going to attack Washington to get New York City, and what he's going to do is attack at Kipps Bay, as you see in this picture. Now, his troops were spread out along this peninsula. And you go up here to King's Bridge, he had a lot of men here because this is his only escape route, and he has to keep this way open, or the British could bottle him up here, trap him, and it's over. So he's got a lot of men here. He's also got some men on an area called Harlem Heights, and of course New York City's over here, and then you got Kipps Bay down here, and you got the East River. Now, what Howe's going to do is he's going to bring his soldiers up to the East River. He's going to start bombarding towards New York and the troops spread out. He's going to start bombarding it, and I've read accounts where it just shook the city, just loud, and just shook the city. And it scared the troops to death. Some of these are militia groups. I think one's from Connecticut who's here at Kipps Bay. After that, he's going to ferry across the East River into Kipps Bay, 4,000 redcoats. 4,000 on these flatboats. Kind of reminds you of the D-Day invasion in June of 1944 when they ferried the Allied forces across the English Channel. Very similar situation. But he's going to ferry these troops across and try to take New York City. And that's exactly what he does. He ferries them across, the shooting starts. Now Washington's up here at Harlem Heights. He hears the shooting, he's going to ride down, and this is where it takes place, the breakdown. And I want you to see Washington taken down from that pedestal and see him as human, because he was. When he saw his troops running, he was furious. He threw his hat down. He said, "Is this the man I'm to defend this country with, this nation? Is this how I'm supposed to beat the biggest army and navy in the world?" And he began, as these men running past him, retreating, he began to hit them with his sword. Not slashing at them, but hitting them with the flat of the sword across their head. Even some officers were running. And he's trying to get them to rally and come back, and he's running forward, and then something happens. He realizes as he moves forward and they're trying to get him to reform, he realizes he's alone. And looking, he sees British soldiers coming down on him. They're closing in on him. And one of his men, Nathaniel Greene, one of his officers, said that he saw Washington just sitting there on his horse, and these British soldiers, about 50 to 100 of them, are coming in on him. They're coming. And he sat there. He said it was like he was in a catatonic state. And this is what Greene said. He saw this as a suicidal impulse. Imagine that, our first president trying to commit suicide by redcoat. Think about it. Think about that man, those pictures in the statue. Here's what Green said. Washington was, quote, so vexed at the infamous conduct of his troops that he sought death rather than life. Wow. And what they had to do, they had to literally grab the reins of his horse and pull him back, take him back across. He sought death rather than life. This is what Ron Chernow, a biographer, said about this situation. He said it was a moment unlike any other in Washington's career, a fleeting emotional breakdown amid battle. You see, even our leaders, they face depression, they face anger, and sometimes even suicidal impulses, as Green said. Washington, of all of our presidents, I want y'all to know, faced the most. And in these upcoming videos, we're going to be talking more about that. The next one we're going to do is Valley Forge. Wow, you're going to see that providence, if it wasn't for God's hand in this revolution, we would have never gotten this country. The British, hands down, they should have beat our forefathers, and we would have never got this country. But Washington did something else too. He was a man of prayer. He prayed. He would often declare days of thanksgiving after a battle, and even during down times, like at Valley Forge, he would call for days of prayer. So it's providence that's going to get us through these bad times, and it's providence now that gets us through these difficult times. And we need to turn to God. We need to turn to Christ as our refuge, and our country needs to turn back to God. I think God's trying to get our attention with this current situation that we're in. So that's what we're going to be doing in the coming days with some more of these videos. I appreciate you watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you would, share it. And I wish you a good day. God bless you, and may God go with you.